Tom thought he was just feeding a stray dog on an empty Tennessee highway. But when that dog locked eyes with him and disappeared into the woods, something told him to follow. What he found hidden in those trees would unravel a decade-old mystery and change two lives forever. This is a story about the unexpected paths that lead us exactly where we need to be. Tom's hands ached as he gripped the steering wheel, the kind of deep bone-tired that came from 17 hours behind the dash. The highway stretched ahead like a gray ribbon through the Tennessee hills, empty except for the occasional roadkill and the shadows of trees pressing in from both sides. He'd been running this route for nearly 30 years, knew every truck stop, every speed trap, every place where the cell signal dropped to nothing. This was the lonely part, the stretch where most drivers just pushed through, chasing home. He almost didn't see the dog. It was the limp that caught his eye first, a careful, favoring gait along the guardrail, the animal clearly nursing an injured front paw. Tom's foot eased off the gas without him thinking about it. The dog was medium-sized, maybe a shepherd mix, its coat matted and dark with road dust. It moved slowly, painfully, pausing every few steps to lift the injured leg. Tom had passed 1,000 strays in his career, and he'd learned the hard way that stopping usually meant trouble. Fleas, bites, or worse, getting attached to something you couldn't keep. But something made him pull over anyway. The air brakes hissed as the rig shuddered to a stop. Tom sat for a moment second-guessing himself. He was 8 hours behind, and Amy was expecting him for her birthday tomorrow. He should keep driving. Instead, he grabbed the sandwich from his cooler, turkey and Swiss, barely touched, and climbed down from the cab. The dog had stopped about 20 yards ahead, watching him with yellow-brown eyes that seemed too aware, too focused. Tom approached slowly, the way his grandfather had taught him around nervous animals. He held out half the sandwich, making soft, clicking noises with his tongue. "Hey there, buddy. You hungry?" The dog didn't move, just stared, head slightly cocked, breath coming in quick pants. Tom set the sandwich on the gravel and backed away, giving it space. He expected the animal to lunge for it. Most strays would have torn into food that fast. But this one just looked at the sandwich, then back at Tom, then picked it up carefully in its teeth, and turned toward the woods. Tom watched, confused, as the dog limped about 10 feet into the brush and stopped. It set the sandwich down, looked back over its shoulder, and waited. "What the hell?" Tom muttered. The dog whined, a low, insistent sound, and took another few steps, stopped again, looked back. Tom felt something cold move through his chest. He'd been on the road long enough to know when something wasn't right, when the universe was tapping him on the shoulder. This wasn't normal dog behavior. This was purpose. "You trying to show me something?" The dog's tail gave a single wag. Tom glanced back at his truck, hazards blinking. Every practical instinct screamed to keep driving. But he thought about Amy's face when he'd canceled last month, all the moments he'd been too tired to stop for. He grabbed his flashlight from the door panel and locked the truck. The dog waited until Tom was 5 feet away, then turned and moved deeper into the trees. Tom followed, pushing through low branches and tangled undergrowth. The ground sloped downward, uneven and treacherous in the fading light. His boots slipped on loose rocks and dead leaves. The dog moved carefully, navigating the terrain like it had walked this path many times. "Where are you taking me?" Tom called out, but the dog just kept moving, glancing back occasionally to make sure Tom was still following. They went deeper. The sound of the highway faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of wind through branches and the crunch of Tom's footsteps. The forest grew darker. Tom's flashlight caught glimpses of the dog's golden-brown fur ahead. Then the dog stopped at the edge of a steep ravine and sat down, its injured paw tucked beneath it. Tom came up beside it, breathing hard, and aimed his flashlight into the depression below. At first, he saw nothing but brambles and vines, dense enough to hide anything. Then the beam caught something angular, metal, rusted, covered in years of growth. A vehicle. Tom's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He moved along the edge of the ravine, playing the light over what he was seeing. It was a pickup truck, old model, nose down in the earth like it had rolled or been driven straight off the road. The rear wheels were barely visible under the vegetation. It had been there a long time, long enough for the forest to try and swallow it whole. The dog whined again, softer this time, and looked at Tom with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. Its tail swept the ground once, twice, as if acknowledging that the job was done. Tom stood at the edge of that ravine, flashlight shaking in his hand, and understood with absolute certainty that his life had just split into before and after. Whatever was down there, whoever had been in that truck, this wasn't just an abandoned vehicle. This was someone's ending. And somehow, this dog had been waiting for someone to finally follow it home. Tom stood frozen at the ravine's edge, his flashlight beam trembling across the wreckage below. The dog sat beside him, patient now, as if its work was done. Tom's mind raced through possibilities. A drunk driver who'd veered off the road, a teenager joyriding, someone who'd simply fallen asleep at the wheel. But the vegetation told a different story. This truck had been here for years, maybe a decade or more. The descent was treacherous. Tom half climbed, half slid down, grabbing roots to keep from tumbling. His boots hit the soft ground with a squelch. The air smelled of rot and rust. The entire front end was accordioned against a massive oak tree. The hood crumpled like tinfoil. Moss crept across the roof and shattered windshield. The driver's side door hung partially open, warped from impact and time. Tom played his light across the vehicle's exterior, looking for any identifying marks. The license plate was so corroded he could barely make out Tennessee, let alone any numbers. He pulled the door wider. It groaned in protest, metal scraping against metal. The interior made Tom's stomach lurch. The seats were buried under years of leaf litter and animal nests. A dried-out air freshener, one of those little pine trees, still dangled from the rearview mirror. And hanging beside it, catching the flashlight beam, were military dog tags. Tom's hand shook as he reached for them. The metal was cold, the engraving barely legible under layers of tarnish. He angled them toward the light and read, Wyatt, James A., CPL, USMC. Jesus, Tom whispered. He searched the front seat, moving aside debris. A rotted cap, crumbled water bottles. Then, wedged between the passenger seat and the center console, he spotted the corner of something fabric. A backpack, olive green, military issue. Tom pulled it free. The canvas was stiff with mold and moisture, but the contents inside had been partially protected by plastic bags. His fingers fumbled with the zipper. Inside, he found a water-damaged Veterans Affairs card with a photo so faded he could barely make out the face. The name matched the dog tags, James Wyatt. Beneath that were letters, maybe 20 of them, bundled together with a rubber band that disintegrated when Tom touched it. Each envelope was addressed in careful handwriting to Ellie Wyatt, with an address in Chattanooga. None of them had been mailed. None of them had even been sealed. Tom opened the top letter with trembling fingers. The ink had run, but enough remained. Ellie, the things I saw changed how my brain works. Some days I don't know where I am. I tried to come home, I swear, but the fear would take over. What if I hurt you? So I kept driving. It ended mid-sentence. Tom's throat tightened. He shuffled through more letters, all addressed to Ellie, all unsent, all fragments of a father trying to reach a daughter through the fog of whatever had broken inside him. There were mentions of headaches, blackouts, days where he couldn't remember his own name. One letter apologized for missing her 16th birthday. Another talked about a job he tried to hold in Memphis but couldn't keep because the crowded warehouse made him feel like walls were closing in. At the bottom of the backpack, Tom found a photograph protected by a plastic sleeve. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, sat on a tire swing. She was laughing, her dark hair flying out behind her. And behind her stood a man in uniform, young, strong, smiling like the world made sense. Written on the back in faded pen, Ellie, age 8, last good day. Tom sat back against the ravine wall, the photo clutched in his hand. This wasn't just some accident. This was a man who'd been running from his own mind, who'd gotten so turned around in his trauma that he'd driven himself literally off the map. The location made a sick kind of sense. Far from any main road, hidden from view. James had probably been living out of this truck, moving from place to place, until one night he'd simply gone too far into the darkness. Tom pulled out his cell phone, no signal, just as he'd expected. He gathered the letters, the VA card, the photograph, and carefully placed them back in the backpack. The dog tags he left hanging from the mirror. They belonged there. When he reached the top, the dog was already there, sitting beside his discarded flashlight. The animal looked at him, then toward the direction of the highway as if to say, "Now you know. Now you have to tell them." Tom touched the dog's head, the first contact between them, and felt the animal lean into his palm. "Yeah," Tom said quietly. "Yeah, I know what I have to do." The walk back to the truck felt longer than the journey in. Tom's mind spun with questions. How long had James been missing? Was anyone still looking? And Ellie, how old would she be now? Those letters had mentioned her 16th birthday, and they'd been sitting in that ravine for years. When they reached the highway, the dog stopped at the tree line and wouldn't come any farther. Tom understood. This animal was tied to these woods, to whatever final purpose it had been serving. He knelt down, eye level with the creature that had changed everything. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on him." The dog's tail wagged once, and then it turned and disappeared back into the shadows. Tom climbed into his cab, the backpack on the seat beside him, and reached for his CB radio. His hands were still shaking as he keyed the mic. "This is Big Tom on I-40 eastbound. Mile marker 304. I need someone to patch me through to local law enforcement. I just found something in the woods they're going to want to see." The sheriff's deputy arrived first, Martinez, young and wide-eyed. Within an hour, 3 squad cars, an ambulance, and a forensics van had transformed the quiet highway. Tom sat on his bumper, drinking coffee Martinez had offered. They'd taken his statement twice. "Mr. Henderson?" A man in a suit approached, his tie loosened against the humid evening air. "I'm Agent Briggs, military liaison. I need to ask you some questions about what you found." Tom nodded, too tired to do anything else. Briggs sat beside him, pulling out a tablet. "James Wyatt, Corporal, Marine Corps, served 2 tours in Fallujah. He was discharged in 2009 with honors, full benefits." He swiped through files. In 2012, he stopped showing up for his VA appointments, stopped cashing his disability checks. His daughter filed a missing person report, but he trailed off, shaking his head. But without evidence of foul play, and with a history of PTSD, it got classified as voluntary disappearance. The thinking was he'd gone off-grid deliberately. Briggs looked toward the woods. Turns out everyone was half right. Over 2 hours, Tom learned the pieces. A VA psychiatrist explained that James suffered severe PTSD and traumatic brain injury from an IED, memory gaps, paranoid episodes, an inability to recognize where he was. The psychiatrist's voice was heavy. He'd wake up not knowing where he was, terrified he'd hurt someone. A database search revealed scattered sightings over the years. A James Wyatt buying supplies with cash at a truck stop in Arkansas. Another working day labor in northern Mississippi under a slightly different name. But the trail always went cold. He'd been a ghost, moving through the South in that old pickup, never staying long enough to leave a real footprint. The paranoia made him change his appearance, use different names, Briggs explained. He probably thought people were tracking him, government, enemies, who knows. The TBI scrambled his threat assessment. He was running from shadows. Tom thought about those letters, the careful handwriting dissolving into frantic scrawls in the later ones. A man trying to hold onto himself while his own mind erased the map home. "What about his daughter?" Tom asked. Briggs looked up from his tablet. "Ellie Wyatt. She's 32 now, lives in Nashville. Works as a nurse." He paused. "She never stopped looking. Paid a private investigator for 3 years until the money ran out. Posted in every veterans forum, every missing persons database. But without a consistent name or location. She couldn't find someone who didn't know he was lost," Tom finished quietly. "Exactly." The forensics team emerged from the woods as dusk settled into full dark. The lead investigator, a graying man named Chen, spoke with Briggs in low tones before approaching Tom. The remains are badly decomposed, but preliminary assessment suggests he died from the crash impact. No signs of foul play. Chun pulled off his gloves. Best guess is he'd been living out of that truck for weeks, maybe months, in that general area. There's evidence of a campsite about 100 yards from the crash. He probably knew those woods well enough to navigate in the dark, but one night, he misjudged the terrain, Tom said. Chun nodded. Drove right off an embankment he couldn't see. The truck probably rolled several times before hitting that tree. Death would have been quick. Tom felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but the knowledge that James hadn't suffered for long at the end. How long ago? He asked. We'll need dental records to confirm identity and run more tests, but based on decomposition and the vegetation growth, 8 to 10 years. Maybe more. Chun glanced back at the woods. He's been there a long time, just waiting to be found. The next morning, Tom was sitting in a diner 10 miles down the road when she walked in. He knew who she was immediately. The same dark hair from the photograph, the same eyes, though these were rimmed with exhaustion and old grief freshly reopened. Ellie Wyatt moved through the diner like she was walking underwater, and when she spotted Tom in the back booth, something in her face cracked. She slid into the seat across from him without asking. Her hands folded on the table so tightly her knuckles went white. "You're the one who found him," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." They sat in silence for a long moment. The diner buzzed around them. Coffee pots clattering. Morning news playing on a corner TV. Other people living ordinary days. "Agent Briggs said there were letters," Ellie finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said my father had been writing to me." Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out the backpack. He'd kept it overnight at Briggs's request, to return personally. He set it gently on the table between them. Ellie stared at it like it might disappear. Her hands trembled as she reached for the zipper. "He never stopped trying to find his way back to you," Tom said. "His mind wouldn't let him, but his heart never quit." Ellie pulled out the first letter, and Tom watched her face as she began to read words her father had written a decade ago. Words that had been waiting in the dark all this time for someone to carry them into the light. Ellie didn't cry at first. She sat in that diner booth reading letter after letter, her lips moving silently as she traced her father's words with her finger. Tom watched her face cycle through a dozen emotions. Grief, anger, relief, love, all of them fighting for space. He sipped his coffee and gave her the silence she needed. When she finally looked up, her eyes were glassy but dry. "He apologized," she said, her voice hollow. "In every single one. He kept saying sorry." She held up one of the later letters, the handwriting barely legible. "This one, he doesn't even finish sentences. He's trying to tell me where he is, but the words just stop making sense halfway through." "The brain injury," Tom said gently. "Briggs told me it got worse over time." Ellie nodded, setting the letter down carefully as if it might disintegrate. "I knew something was wrong before he disappeared. He'd show up at my apartment at 3 in the morning, confused about why I wasn't still living in our old house. He'd forget conversations we'd had an hour earlier." Her hands clenched into fists. "I tried to get him help. I drove him to the VA myself, sat in those waiting rooms for hours. But the second I took my eyes off him, he'd leave. Just walk out and disappear for days." "He was scared," Tom offered. "He was terrified." Ellie's voice cracked. "Of himself. Of what he might do. There's a letter in here where he talks about waking up once in a grocery store parking lot with no memory of driving there. He was afraid he'd hurt someone during one of those blackouts. So he decided the safest thing was to stay away from everyone. Especially me." Tom thought about his own daughter, about all the times he'd chosen the road over being present. It wasn't the same. He had his mind, his choices, but the absence was still absence. The empty chairs at birthday dinners still stayed empty. "I spent 12 years thinking he'd abandoned me," Ellie said quietly. 12 years angry at him for choosing to leave. And all that time, he was lost out there, trying so hard to protect me that he couldn't find his way home. She pulled out the photograph Tom had found, her younger self on that tire swing, her father behind her in uniform. She stared at it for a long time. This was taken 2 weeks before his last deployment, she said. He put up that swing himself. Spent a whole Saturday getting it perfect. A sad smile crossed her face. He called it our last good day. I didn't know that's what it was. Tom felt the weight of it, all those years of searching, of not knowing, of carrying questions that had no answers. And now the answers were here, written in faded ink and found in a ravine by a stranger who'd stopped to feed a stray dog. Agent Briggs said you followed a dog into those woods, Ellie said, as if reading his thoughts. Yeah, injured paw, limping pretty bad. It wouldn't eat until I followed it. Can you show me? Ellie asked suddenly. The place where you found him? They drove in Tom's truck, Ellie silent in the passenger seat clutching the backpack. The morning sun was burning off the mist as they pulled onto the shoulder where Tom had stopped the day before. The forensics team had cleared out, leaving only tire tracks and trampled grass as evidence they'd been there at all. Tom led her along the marked path, moving slower this time in daylight. Ellie walked with purpose, her nurse's training keeping her steady even as her breathing grew ragged. When they reached the ravine, she stood at the edge for a long time, looking down at the wreckage that had been excavated and photographed but not yet removed. He was so close, she whispered. This whole time he was only 2 hours from Nashville. I drove past this stretch of highway 100 times looking for him. You couldn't have known, Tom said. No, but he knew. Somewhere in whatever was left of his mind, he knew. She pulled something from her pocket, a small bundle of wildflowers she must have picked from the roadside. He was trying to get home. He just ran out of road before he could make it. They climbed down together. Tom steadied her when the slope got steep, and they stood beside the crumpled truck in silence. Ellie reached through the shattered window and touched the dog tags still hanging from the mirror. Then she placed the flowers on the driver's seat, arranging them carefully around the place where her father had taken his last breath. I forgive you, Dad, she said to the empty air. I understand now. You didn't leave me. You just got lost trying to keep me safe. On the way back up, Ellie asked, the dog that led you here, did you see where it went? Tom shook his head. Disappeared back into the woods. I haven't seen it since. My dad always loved dogs, Ellie said softly. We had a shepherd mix when I was little. He used to say dogs had better instincts than people, that they knew who needed help. When they reached the truck, Ellie turned to Tom with purpose in her eyes. I want to find that dog. He's hurt and he's been alone out here. If my father took care of him. She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Tom nodded. I'll help you look. They spent an hour walking the tree line, calling out and leaving food behind. The dog never appeared. But just as they were about to give up, Tom spotted something carved into a tree trunk about 30 yards into the woods. Initials inside a heart, weathered but still visible. JW plus EW. Ellie traced the carving with her fingers, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. He was here, she said. Really here. Thinking about me. Tom put a hand on her shoulder, and they stood together in the dappled sunlight, two strangers connected by chance and choice, and the mysterious ways that lost things eventually make themselves found. Before Tom climbed back into his cab to finally head home, Ellie hugged him, fierce and quick. Thank you for stopping, she said. Thank you for following that dog when every logical reason said not to. Tom thought about all the exits he'd taken in his life, all the times he'd kept driving when something asked him to pull over. He thought about his daughter Amy, waiting for him to show up, to choose her over the next delivery. Sometimes the detour is the destination, he said. As he pulled back onto the highway, Tom glanced in his side mirror and saw Ellie standing at the tree line, the backpack slung over her shoulder, looking into the woods like she was saying a final goodbye. Or maybe a hello to the father she'd finally been able to bring home. Not in body, but in understanding. In peace. Tom picked up his phone and dialed Amy's number. Hey, sweetheart, he said when she answered. I'm running late, but I'm coming. And this time I'm staying for the whole weekend. I've got a story to tell you about why some things are worth stopping for. In the rearview mirror, the Tennessee woods grew small and then disappeared, holding their secrets and their stories, their ghosts and their guardians. They're endings that were also beginnings. And somewhere in those trees, a dog with an injured paw watched the truck drive away, its purpose finally complete. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness open the biggest doors. Tom stopped for a hungry dog and ended up bringing a daughter the answers she'd been searching for her whole adult life. It makes you wonder, how many moments do we walk past every day that could change everything? What would you have done in Tom's place? Drop your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to Embrace the Journey for more stories that remind us why compassion matters.